Hey, this is Tune Into Gaming. I am Quactical.
And I'm North Kozar.
Are you now?
You've done this. Yes, I am. How many times do I have to say my name?
And you were then.
Yes.
And you still are now.
I am and forever always will be my internet alias until someday someone takes it from me and or the internet ceases to exist.
In today's episode, you will hear our two internet aliases discussing topics like the upcoming Battlefront game, Legend of Zelda Wind Waker, and Starcraft Remastered. And then we'll finish up with a music sample.
That was very, announcery.
I
liked it. It was very much like, what is it? Not when you go to the movies. When you go to the, I don't know. What am I trying to? Oh, like
the
you're
races.
You're like at a game or something, like a sports event game place, and they announce something during.
Now batting.
Yeah. That kind of
I
thing.
don't know the names of any baseball players, or else I would have continued that statement.
We're doing good on this. Maybe we should just stick to the video games.
So, hey there, not stranger.
Not stranger. Stranger danger.
Yeah, definitely not stranger danger. Let's
really
not have stranger danger today.
Well, I mean, you could be a stranger for all I know. I haven't seen you for.
I could be one of those fake internet friends. I could be catfishing you.
You would. You would just show up on my doorstep and actually be boxy. And
But we met in real life first. Still catfished. Oh, yeah.
Still, just didn't even expect it. The ultimate catfish at the end of the day.
All of the cat. All of the fish combined into one. Catfish!
Speaking of fish, weren't you playing Wind Waker? I don't know that that's relevant, but I wanted to make that segue because there's a lot of water in Wind Waker.
You wanted to make a segue out of a fish, or you wanted to make a fish into a segue? I guess the game isn't actually that relevant to fish either. I haven't seen that many fish so far.
There is one fish that you see a lot, though.
Oh, maybe I'm forgetting. But I'm on the second island or something like that. Dragon's Roost Island, I think, is the name of it.
Okay. Yeah, I think you probably met the fish cartographer dude. He draws on your map. Maybe not.
I met a little guy who was pretending to be a fairy who gave me a map. That was a very strange encounter. Oh, his name was Tingle. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I felt a tingle. But maybe that was some stranger danger.
Yeah, if you came across him, that would be some definite stranger danger.
I mean, the beginning part of the game is stranger danger a little bit anyway, because it's small child boards boat full of bloodthirsty pirates. Well, quote unquote bloodthirsty pirates. And then they proceed to launch him in a catapult at Ganon's fortress. This is not that appropriate for children.
But it was effective, was it not? He has to save his sister.
His sister, and he takes to the seas to do so. Oh.
Right. So how are you enjoying it so far?
It's been really good so far, actually. I've never really played a Zelda game to completion before. I played a decent amount of Twilight Princess on your Wii, I'm pretty sure. And
really?
Yes.
Nice.
But I don't know how far through the game I got. Anyway, other than that, I haven't played a lot of other Zelda games, definitely not to completion. So I'm excited to play this and hopefully, I say to completion and I'm on the first dungeon. So, and
Wind Waker is a little bit different as far as Zelda games go, just because it's a lot different in scale. There's just a lot of travel and water and whatnot. But I mean, it's a really good game. It took me a while to get into it when I first played it because of the graphics. I was like, he shouldn't be cartoony, blur, blur, blur. But
see, that didn't bother me at all. I didn't care because, I don't know, maybe it's just because I don't have an idea in my head of what Link is supposed to look like.
Yeah, that's probably accurate.
I named my character Molinka because I figured, small child takes to the seas to, well, I guess not so small child in the case of the movie Moana, but it was just similar to me. Take to the seas to, save your family from a great evil.
That Disney reference, though.
Hashtag Disney. Before it was cool. When did Wind Waker come out? Wasn't it originally GameCube?
Yes.
So yes.
I don't know what year, but yeah, it was originally a GameCube Release.
Yeah, I definitely was just thinking of that. So I named my character Molinka. But yeah, I've been having a really good time with it. I think it definitely feels like a Nintendo game for sure. Like with the conducting, especially, and then just the dungeon design. But it's really interesting how like this actually, when you look at Zelda or Zelda games, they really are, or at least like this one seems to me, it's a very like, I don't want to say stripped down, but like it has the essentials of like the dungeon exploration experience, which is interesting because like we always talk about like dungeon crawler games, and like I tend to go down like a roguelike path with this, but this is a very heavily like linear, almost linear, not necessarily in some of the cases, but in terms of the objectives, kind of linear, like very, very heavily designed. And so it's interesting how like you can get some of those similar like types of experiences that we're looking for in more like dynamic and procedural games. I don't know. I just thought that was kind of an interesting connection that I made while playing it.
Yeah, the dungeons in all of the Zelda games, by and large, have the ultimate objective of get to the end, beat the boss, and you might have to backtrack and do some other stuff to get there, but it's going to be very linear in the sense of you'll be making progress towards the end. There's not like going to be this point where you get halfway through and suddenly can no longer progress.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm a little stuck right now, actually. But
just puzzle wise.
Yeah, there's a point where I think like I got the boss key, and I think I need to use this like swinging rope to get back to the main area of the dungeon to actually go get to the boss door, because I'm in this like other area now. But I can't make it, and so I'm thinking I'm doing something wrong.
Do you have the dungeon map?
Yes.
Okay.
But I think I'm in like a area where there's actually no other pathway out because of a different part of the dungeon or something to that effect. I don't know. I'm hoping to get unstuck next time I play. If not, I may use a guide. But yeah, it's interesting how I'm enjoying the dungeon exploration experience, even though it is very linear. Like,
well, that's really the appeal of the Zelda games, is to kind of have that, puzzle solving adventure type of game. You do the things you need to do to go to the place and do the do.
Do the do?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it definitely is like flexing my gaming muscles, or like gaming brain muscles in a way that I haven't used them in a while, just in terms of the way they're designed as puzzles. Like a lot of games nowadays, it's because we have more focus on like the action part of the mechanics, right? Sometimes, and maybe it's just like, especially with multiplayer games, you don't have like puzzles in the same way, overlaid with like a single player experience or like a story experience. But of course, there are modern games that do that too. So maybe I'm just not playing them.
That could definitely be. And I think that how the Nintendo puzzle / Legend of Zelda, maybe more specifically puzzles, work is very not like exclusive, but familiar, in the sense that if you've played Zelda games, you're gonna have a better idea of like playing other Zelda games and picking up on the puzzles and the game design cues and whatnot that are there.
Like you need to light this torch or press this button to activate a path and then a door opens and then you hear the sound cue. It's like the design is very clean in the sense that like every mechanic has a clear purpose that like interacts with either like a barrier or an obstacle in the dungeon, and maybe that's a physical barrier like a wall or a door, or a conceptual one like you don't know where to go and then suddenly a secret door opens. But it's always a clearly defined thing. It's like you have to get to the end of this area to then hit this button or solve a particular puzzle to activate the ability to get yourself to the next stage. And so it's linear in the sense that you have to do things in that progression, but you end up like going all over the place to do so, which is like, it's interesting because it reminds me of a point. I don't remember who made this point. It might have been Ego Raptor, but it was about Cave Story, talking about how like they get a lot of utility out of a small amount of area, or they get a lot of real estate, I think is what they called it, because it's like you're basically having the player traverse a similar area multiple times for different objectives and then changing the gameplay during their journey through it each time, right?
Yeah.
Because like Cave Story, for example, it's like you go through an area and then the next time you come through, it has different monsters, etc.
I think of the egg corridor as the one that I remember.
And so I think you get maybe somewhat of a related or similar effect with Zelda, because like you end up going through the dungeon in like different ways, or like you're going back this way and then back that way, but it's always to like, oh, and now we need to go find this button, and now I opened this door back up over here in the first area that I left because I reached a dead end before, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's kind of interesting how they get like extra use out of a smaller amount of dungeons. So you don't need just like this massive sprawling like maze where it's like, oh, well, I'm just walking and lost and I've never seen this area before. And maybe that's what like, hones in that exploration experience, because then like, you start to become familiar with the area around you, and then when a new area unlocks itself in a dungeon, it's like, wow, this is cool. I wonder what's behind that door.
Maybe. I think usually the sense is, yay, I've made progression, or now I'm getting closer to completing the dungeon, as opposed to, at least in the traditional Zelda games, as opposed to that sense of wonder or exploration. And I mean, it could be depending on what dungeon you're in, but usually for me, it was very much a sense of like, I did the thing that I was supposed to do, onward to the next.
Onward ho.
Yeah, as opposed to exploration type of gratification from it. But
I don't know, maybe I'm just like reading that on top of it then. But I am very interested to sail around the seas more and see what's on the map, because just looking at the map and like how far I had to sail to get to this area from the other island I was at, and then seeing the size of the map, I'm like, wow, there's going to be a decent amount of stuff there.
Yeah, it's a lot of water, but
I figured
there's definitely some stuff there, I would say. It's interesting kind of talking about the dungeon design and whatnot and how you're experiencing it. And for me, because I've been playing a lot of Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild lately, that it's a new and different experience for me in their quote unquote dungeons, because they aren't what you're experiencing playing Wind Waker. They're not the traditional, you go into the dungeon, you progress using items you have, you find a new item that helps you then complete the dungeon. It's, in Breath of the Wild, you're given all of the tools that you need to complete the game, basically, before you even can leave, like the tutorial part of it.
Huh.
And so when you get to these quote unquote dungeons, because it's basically you have to access these certain points and like activate a main terminal to complete it. And in doing so, there's a lot of different paths that you can take to get there. It's not so clear cut as, here's an eye, let me shoot it with an arrow and the door opens necessarily. It's, well, is there water? Maybe I can use my like ice pillar power to make a block that I can jump up on top of. Or maybe I can use magnesis and pull something metal over to make a platform. Or maybe I can stop time on something and hit it to activate a lever somewhere else. And like, there's been multiple situations where I've come across, an obstacle where I'm like, I need to do a thing to access this other thing. And there's not like one clear cut way. There might be like hints of maybe you should do this or maybe you should do that.
But there's probably multiple things that could work.
Totally. For example, in one of the ones I just did, you have the ability to essentially rotate the dungeon 90 degrees. So because Breath of the Wild is an amazing physics sandbox as well, you're in this dungeon, you've opened chests, you activate it, it rotates 90 degrees, and then all of the chests roll to one side, you roll to the other side. But if you jump, you can paraglide and land on a ledge, like as it's rotating, and you can kind of like awesome. Walk around the edge of things as well.
That's so cool.
One of the things that I had to do was light a torch with a special blue flame. And
not a regular blue flame.
Correct. When I first got into the dungeon, there was a treasure chest that had a torch in it. And I was like, I don't need a torch because I was lighting my arrows on fire and using it to light the other blue torches. But I came across this one blue torch that needed to be lit really far away. And it involved me having to like do some weird rotatey shenanigans and stuff to get out to it. And I was like, man, I really wish that I had picked up that torch because I don't know where it went now. But I had to figure out a way to, have my bow or have my arrow become the blue flame torch thing and climb on top of this to like get to the torch that I had to light without accidentally like putting my bow away or, anything like that. So it was a very interesting, trying to figure it out without being told like, this is exactly how to do it. The game did give me a torch, to be fair. And I was like, no, I don't need it. I'm good for now. Not recognizing that there was going to be this other challenge later, which it might have been easier if I had a torch, but it's very neat because the game gives you hints and clues as to how you might need to do something. Again, because as you're playing and you go through, there's a lot of shrines, which are essentially really mini dungeons that take maybe 5 to 10 minutes to complete.
Okay.
That sort of introduce you to some of these concepts, like what things should you look for to use magnesis on, what things should you look for to stasis and like hit to launch places and whatnot. So it really kind of teaches you these things through going through these shrines. And the reason you want to do the shrines is because that's how you can like get more hearts and, quote unquote level up Link. So there's that incentive there. But it's really cool having so much freedom in solving these puzzles as opposed to like in the previous Zelda games, it was very much, here's the hookshot panel, hookshot to the hookshot panel. And then, you still have to figure out the puzzle, but it's kind of like a little bit more obvious in terms of when you get an item, you're going to be using it in that dungeon kind of thing.
Because the uses are more diverse as well for each of the items. It's not like there's one specific use for it or like an enumerated set of uses for it, right?
Yeah.
That's interesting to see them make that evolution from a very like lock and key type approach to the puzzles and the items and the interaction to now you're right, it's a sandbox of, okay, we've given you a power that does this. Now go see what you can do with it. Which is kind of like what we appreciate about other types of open world games. Think like Just Cause 2, i.e. the grappling hook, right? The grappling hook was a thing that's like, let's see what crazy shit the players can come up with. Very much one of those kinds of features. And it's like really cool to see Nintendo adapting some of that kind of approach to Breath of the Wild, for sure.
So you've also been doing a lot of, I guess, sailing, because you've been playing Sid Meier's Pirates as well, haven't you?
Yeah, just a little bit. It's not been working that well on my computer. It's just been randomly crashing a little bit, and I actually did a little bit of Google Foo, but wasn't able to find anything. I was considering streaming it, but if it's going to be crashing all the time, it's probably not going to work out so well, right?
Yeah.
But that's a great game as well. I've played a lot of it, I think, on the Xbox. I don't really know where my copy went. I'm also sad about that, but that's the reason I got it on Steam.
Gotcha.
But yeah, I think the game came out in 2004 or something like that. Maybe a little bit earlier than that. Yeah, it's pretty old.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're a pirate. You get to sign up. It's fairly basic. It's almost like, not fairly basic, but it almost has like an arcadey feel to it in the sense that it's like you get to sign up with, like the English, the French, the Dutch, the Spanish, and the storyline is the same either way. It's like you have to go save your family from this evil baron, and then in each of the areas there's different like dread pirates that are on the list of like top 10 pirates, and like depending on how much money you've earned, like you go up and down the list. It's almost like a high score chart, right? And then as you go around, like you can attack ships that are sailing around, because there'll be like trade ships going back and forth between the various islands, or then like warships who are trying to hunt down pirates or like fight each other. But then it's like kind of a simulation too, because the nations will go to war with each other. And then as you get a larger and larger crew, you can actually attack some of the towns and like plunder them. And then if you're like a high-ranking person for the English, for example, if you take a town and they're at war with the Spanish, I'm pretty sure you can like hand it over to the English.
Oh, that's interesting.
But it like wrecks the town's economy.
Well, yeah.
And you can like buy and sell goods. When you like capture a ship, like if you like sail up to a ship and you're like, I'm a scurvy pirate, so I'm gonna take that ship. You just get to like add it to your fleet. So I think you can have up to 5 ships.
That's cool.
So it's pretty cool. There's some other mechanics too, like there's these special ship upgrades that give you like more damage resistance, different shot types, etc. So it definitely lends itself to having like one flagship that you use in all the fights, because you can only fight with one ship at a time, unfortunately.
Okay.
But so it definitely lends itself, like I was saying, to having one flagship, because then you have all the upgrades on that ship, and then you put like all your cannons there, and then you can just like destroy even much larger ships because your ship is upgraded. Although a lot of times you don't want to destroy them, you want to just like cripple their sails and then take their treasure, because you're after the money, not really killing. Unless you're after killing, but you don't really get very much score for doing that.
Yeah, it decentivizes?
Yeah.
Disincentives, makes non-incentives towards just mindless killing.
Yeah.
More games should do that.
And it's interesting too, because like it has a story in the sense that you have to save your family, but that plays out by finding pieces of treasure maps. And there's like a specific mechanic for doing that. You have to go to an inn and talk to the mysterious stranger in the back. And every port you go to has an inn and has a mysterious stranger in the back, and they'll do like one of a couple things. They'll like sell you an item, or they'll give you like a map, or they can tell you where like a famous pirate was or something like that. So like it's interesting because again, the design is very clean. Every element of the game has like 2 or 3 things that they can do, or advantages or things they can give you to help you out, right? And then you have to go do something with that. Like maybe they give you a piece of a map to a treasure chest, right? But then you have to go sail there and like land a party, and you have to like walk around and dig.
That's cool.
Or then, somebody you can start to court the daughters of the governors of the different ports. And then there's like a dancing minigame too, but then like some of them will want you to go buy them like jewelry and different gifts. And then so those mysterious strangers will sometimes sell you those. So like depending on what items you've bought off of them, you can, woo the lady of your choice.
Interesting. It sounds very in-depth for such an old game. Not that older games were less in-depth, but just it's mechanically speaking. It's
interesting because, like we've been talking about, I think for a lot of these games, because graphically there was a very low ceiling. There wasn't the space on a lot of these game discs, right, to put, gigabytes and gigabytes and gigabytes of very, very complex 3D models. So they had, very basic 3D models, and then spent a lot of time developing features and logic and like game mechanics that were dynamic. And it's interesting that it seems like we've gone away from that in some ways for some types of games, but then in other types of games like Breath of the Wild, that's coming out again in full force, like side by side with the graphical element. So
definitely. Well, and it not just so much to say graphics in terms of like, look at how amazing this looks, but in terms of like an artistic style.
Yeah.
Like of the Zelda games, Breath of the Wild has a very cohesive visual appeal, and it looks like I'm watching like a Hayao Miyazaki film.
Oh yeah.
In terms of that kind of cel-shaded, simplistic look, but with a lot of wonderful shadows and shading that really makes it pop.
Yeah. And of course, like a game like Sid Meier's Pirates is not comparable to the aesthetic appeal of Breath of the Wild or the gameplay in any sense. In that way, of course, it's a totally different type of game. But it is just interesting, like how the focus has changed to some extent across the industry.
Yeah.
I don't know, but it's good to play those older games for me. It's like the throwback appeal, but it also just gives me like a better sense of how those design decisions have changed.
Yeah. Definitely. I think that there's just a lot of nostalgia in playing older games, but in comparing them to newer ones, looking at the level and depth of gameplay as opposed to the pretty shininess of the graphics, I suppose.
Yeah. Like I was saying for Pirates, the way all the mechanics kind of work in a similar mold, like, each of the NPCs in the game has a couple of different ways in which they can help you, right? But you have to do something with it. And they replicated that across many of the different mechanics of the game. So it made it feel coherent because everything kind of worked in the same way, but then it gave you a lot of variety without actually having to. I mean, obviously they did spend a lot of time on it, but it's a way to like give yourself that sense of breadth, even though the actual underlying mechanics are pretty basic.
That's interesting, and that kind of makes me think in comparing, older games to newer ones in that regard, the depth of the gameplay, as well as, well, maybe depth or breadth. I guess it kind of depends on how you look at it. But thinking about the old Star Wars Battlefront 2, in terms of how they had like the sort of story campaign, they had the galactic conquest, and in terms of the game, it was, go and capture the command points and win.
Right.
So a simple concept, but at the same time, there were so many different ways that was sort of played out in either different maps or different scenarios, like the space battles being one of the really unique things I felt about it. But then taking that same sort of idea and applying that to the galactic conquest model of, having not just the individual games matter, but the overall picture matter as well.
Yeah, like putting that sort of meta game mode together when, a lot of games would just say like, okay, here's our single player campaign, here's our multiplayer mode. Like, it just was really cool that they were able to flesh out the game by adding those extra elements. And it was interesting because I was reading up on Battlefront 2 ahead of the podcast. Like the older game, 2005, I think was when it was released. And reading actually some of the criticisms, people are saying like, oh, the single player campaign is kind of weak, like, etc. Each of the modes is weak or maybe like incomplete in X way or for Y reason.
Yeah.
But then, like, when you look at the game as a whole, having all of those different features and all of the different things it could do, it's amazing.
Not as much depth, but more breadth in this regard.
But it's sort of, it's a type of depth. It's the depth of the concept of what can you do with a Star Wars Battlefront game, or like, a shooter that's supposed to take place in the middle of a Star Wars battle, not like a multiplayer 8v8 online arena. You put yourself in the middle of Star Wars, and what is the experience like, right? And they had a primitive way of expressing that, quote unquote primitive, right? Okay, so you're on a capture point map and there's AI teams and they go and capture them. Okay, but then you lay a complex system on top of it with Galactic Conquest, and that's one way of giving you that experience of being in Star Wars, right? Or then you lay a single player campaign on top of that, and that's another way of doing so. And yes, the way that they did that for each, Galactic Conquest, there's so many cool elements and features that it could have had. But the fact that it's there is important, I guess.
Yeah. Well, but the new Battlefront, it doesn't have, correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't know, I haven't looked into it since it released. But it doesn't have a single player, and it doesn't have a Galactic Conquest at all.
Yeah, basically.
Okay. So it's just the multiplayer arena thing going on.
Yeah. And there's no space battles either. There's one space themed level, which is the Death Star, but there was a Death Star level in Battlefront 2, although it was like interior Death Star.
Right.
But I'm pretty sure that's what the new one is. I don't know.
Outside flying your ships around, boarding other capital ships and whatnot.
Right. Granted. And here's one thing that, having done, again, a little bit of research I did ahead of this podcast, because we were going to talk about this, looking at Battlefront 1 compared to Battlefront 2, kind of has a similar trajectory. Because, there's a lot of rumors going around now. I think the trailer for the new Battlefront 2 is released on April 15th.
Okay.
Yeah, and so they're saying, okay, now it's going to have a single-player campaign, now it's going to have some of these features, when they already put everyone through a round of $60 game plus DLC packs for basically the early access, like, is effectively what it was. But it's like, okay, maybe it's analogous to, it's like, this is the proof of concept, and then they're really going to put that love into the diversity of features and game modes in the second version.
I would love that, because, I mean, to be fair, I've never played Star Wars Battlefront 1, like the old original one.
Mm-hmm.
I've never heard anything about it. I've never looked into it, because the only one I know and remember is 2, because that one was the one that was better. So maybe it will follow a similar trajectory, even if it does come with a $60, plus DLC, Season Pass 3, 4, and 5.
And part of that model had to do with, they originally planned to have a single player campaign, but it was scrapped because of the time constraints on having to release it with Force Awakens.
Oh, interesting.
Yep.
I didn't realize that
I
was...
also learned that today.
that makes a lot of sense, though,
Yeah.
because why would they not release it alongside the movie?
Exactly.
Like,
and so, to some extent, one, by latching onto the title, they carry the brand on, and so they get some amount of sales boost for that. Latching onto the movie, they get sales boost for that, and they're like, okay, well, now let's put out a proof of concept, rake in all that cash, and then pay for the next game, basically.
Yeah. I hope so. I really do.
Yeah,
because
me too.
I wanted to be as excited about this past Battlefront game. So maybe Battlefront 2 will do it.
Yeah.
I hope so. I want to remain hopeful about it, but I'm not going to get my expectations up, but I will remain hopeful, I guess I should say.
It's just interesting though, because it's like I'm curious just to compare the budgets of the sets of games, the old Battlefront 1 and 2 to the new Battlefront 1 and 2.
There's probably no comparison. The newer ones probably had such a huger budget, hugely.
And what have we gained? Like
graphics.
Yeah, like literally graphics, and I guess it more than anything, the stability and robustness of the multiplayer infrastructure is like also what goes into it.
I suppose. I think that it's a different time.
That's true.
So it's a little bit different in terms of thinking about what online multiplayer was back in the original Xbox days.
Right.
Which was brand new. And comparing that to what it is now, there's a standard and an expectation that it should reach. And so I think that whether it was the technology or whatnot that was or was not developed back then, I think it's a little hard to compare that aspect of it. But now it's kind of like, here's the model and the framework, adapt it to fit your game in terms of how, like, matchmaking is a very universal thing. You want it to put you in a game immediately and boom, there you go.
Right.
So I think that it's just something that people have come to expect. Which is also the interesting thing when, like, Titanfall 1 released a game without really a single player.
Mm-hmm.
The expectation that, shooter games come with a campaign. And then Titanfall 2 was like, oh, okay, and apparently releases an amazing campaign, or one that was at least well received.
Yeah. It's interesting how that concept has, like, evolved over time. The shooters must come with a campaign concept.
Yeah. Well, because it's hard to think in this day and age that there are people who don't play games online if they want to,
mm-hmm.
get a first-person shooter game like Titanfall 2, to not experience the multiplayer is interesting to me, because I wouldn't buy that kind of game for the single player. I would buy Far Cry 4 or,
like Wolfenstein,
something that's a shooter. Something that is a, single-player driven story shooter first,
Borderlands,
and then yeah, exactly. And then it's like, oh, also you can play and shoot other people.
Whereas the more traditional, like, FPS game has really become a multiplayer fixture. And it's interesting, again, looking at some of the, like, reviews and criticisms of the original Battlefront games, because these were actually some of the criticisms talking about, this is a less focus on the single player campaign. The multiplayer is good, but the single player feels propped up. Like,
yeah.
And those seeds were already there. And, that's not to say that it didn't make sense for those games, because to some extent, the strengths that we liked about Battlefront 2 were, the custom games and, like, Galactic Conquest and, like, playing split screen, which is basically, a multiplayer game mode, right?
Yeah, man, I don't even want to go down the rabbit hole of the lack of split screen support nowadays, but
I think the new Battlefront actually has it on console.
I don't think so.
I thought I saw something that said it. Maybe I was wrong.
I from my understanding, it was basically the same sort of model as Battlefield in terms of, look, we've got this really gorgeous game. You're not going to be able to run, two separate people looking on two different ways on a console. At least that is what I remember.
Yeah, there's split screen co-op in Star Wars Battlefront. Or maybe there's like there's like a co-op mode.
Right. But you can't play online split screen.
Yeah.
Or like local custom game split screen. It's a specific couch co-op mode type
think
of thing?
So
I don't know. I can't speak on it because I don't know for sure that much about it. But
yeah,
I miss split screen stuff, and
yeah,
so,
just being able to like go over to your house and play online Halo. Like that's what we did.
Yeah, that was pretty good. That's why I hope that the difference, with the Switch is that there will still the Nintendo. I don't think will ever get rid of, with the couch co-op split screen play, because that's what makes a lot of their games. But having the Switch be portable, I think, opens up a lot of possibilities to allow. So like if if we wanted to play Splatoon 2 when it's released on the Switch, you could come over and we could like party up.
Mm-hmm.
You could bring your Switch and I could play on my TV, you could play on yours, and then we just would be able to like play in the same game, but having different consoles, but be next to each other.
And that's
so it's
pretty
like,
cool.
yeah, I think it's a way to sort of remedy some of the, I guess, sadness of the loss of split screen gaming, but still allowing it. Like, I'm excited to see where the Switch goes, but we've already discussed that, so I won't go back down that again. But
yeah, I mean, I'd like to see the concept taken further to like some asymmetric multiplayer modes with potential split screen versus like, okay, maybe you have people in different locations and you have an element where it's actually a different gameplay for two people in the same room versus one person in a room, or there's some asymmetry in the game that allows for that.
This is what I wanted the Wii U to be. So much more than they did. I think there was only really one or two release games that utilized
like the person with the gamepad is like a different role than the people with like Wiimotes.
Right. Like have a platformer where the person is placing enemies further down in the level or something.
Mm-hmm.
Or,
Mario Maker Live.
So something like that, or just having these other concepts that utilize the gamepad, because I thought that was a really amazing bit of technology when they were like, hey, we're going to have a fifth controller. It's going to do this. And I was like, there's so many possibilities. And then nothing came out of it. There was like one game that I remember seeing a demo for that I can't even recall what it was, that came with release. And it was like, look, you can draw platforms and shapes on the gamepad to help your friends complete the level. Like, that's awesome. You have this one person who's drawing the lines to make platforms so that people can keep going. And the people who are actually playing the platformer, you switch off. Great. Then expand upon that. And they never did, which was sad.
I mean, I guess going down this route is keep talking and nobody explodes is another example of something that's kind of like that. That would actually be really cool on the Wii U. Or like the Switch, something like the Switch. Because like you could have, I don't know, if you're not familiar with Keep Talking or Nobody Explodes, it's a bomb defusal game in which like you want to play it over voice chat, and one person is actually like in the game, as in like the computer application defusing the bomb, but the other person is just reading the manual. So you can like have them be like on the phone, literally in another room. But it could work really well for something like that, because then they can just like read the manual on the screen, or it's very easy to like split up the players.
Yeah. I don't know. I think that there's a lot of possibility, and I'm excited to see.
Yeah.
But I'm also still bummed that the Wii U didn't capitalize on all that I felt it had the potential to.
Yeah. It's interesting, talking about the rework and remaster concept, because it's very much a thing in gaming these days, right?
It's very in.
It's very in. And, to some extent, it's because companies want to release what's safe. They want to release what they know is going to make them money. And I think that's part of why, like we're talking about Battlefront, why it came out in the shape that it did, because they knew that it was going to sell even in that state.
People who had the nostalgia for Battlefront 2, people who like Star Wars, people who wanted to see the new Star Wars movie, people who wanted a new Star Wars game, you pull on all the nostalgia strings all at the same time, buco bucks.
And you know what? I bet you that like a decent amount of the people who played Battlefront 2 probably didn't even care about half the things that we hold it up so highly because of, right? So they may not even necessarily be displeased at all with the new Battlefront, because from like the gameplay and graphical standpoint, it's incredible comparatively.
It's a Star Wars shooter,
right?
Person Star
and
Wars
so
shooter.
It does satisfy that need, and that's the thing. That's what we're talking about. These games get, dumbed down isn't really the right way to put it, but they get streamlined.
Yeah,
they're much more streamlined because the audience is larger, and we're talking about the budget too, and that plays right into it. it's a different world, different concept, different scale. We talked about BioWare, and how different it is now from, where they were and the type of game and the type of story they were telling for the early RPGs, like, Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, Neverwinter Nights. Back when the budgets were like a tenth, like 100th of what they are now, right? Now they're a major studio.
Yeah, it was a much more narrowed scope as well. They were like, this is the kind of game we want. This is the, audience we're trying to hit. Now they're trying to get it out to everyone.
Yeah. And I think there's something like it's like a lower barrier of entry. That's the wrong term, but when you have a game that games are not so much more like visually and aesthetically pleasing,
right?
It seems like maybe they worked harder on the design before, or like they had to do more to make it playable. Whereas like now you can kind of get away with poor design because the game still is engaging because it looks so good.
It depends, but I think that that's part of it. For the vast majority of people, as long as the game doesn't have lots of game-breaking bugs that makes it absolutely unplayable, if it looks good, cool. People who, like the vast majority of people who are going to pick up and play, Mass Effect 2 or 3 aren't going to be like, hey, why don't I have all these RPG customization trees all these other options,
right?
Like I did in Mass Effect 1. They're not going to say that. They're not going to, comment about the fact that there's no more exploration on planets or whatnot. And it's what they're coming to the game for is, hey, the game looks cool and I can shoot things. And that is the broader audience that they're trying to hit. And so barrier of entry, you're kind of right in terms of they're lowering it because they need to be able to get more people to play the game and to sell more copies.
And it has to be more accessible. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think also another part of the concept for me is it's like a do more with less, or that's what developers had to do like 20 years ago, right? Because the resources were so limited in terms of space, in terms of speed, in terms of like...
And now there's sort of this plateau in terms of, oh, this is what works, this is what sells, and we have the technology to make it look better. Keep doing it over and over and over again,
right? Because
it'll sell. If you push the envelope or you try to do more with what you have, then whoa, hey, calm down, things are going to get weird, which is why I think VR is really cool and an interesting new way to sort of break new ground. I don't know that I'm going to be a big VR gamer the more, commonplace that becomes a thing, but I like all of the things that people are trying with it because it's this new technology, but it's like, what can I do with this thing? And I wish there was more of that in terms of just gameplay in general when these developers are working on game design. By these developers, I mean typically the larger studios that are producing these bigger titles. And I think that that's why we always end up leaning more toward indie games, is because they're trying new things and they have that ability without as much pressure or pressure at all.
Yeah, they can be experimental publishers. And it's not as big of a risk.
Yeah.
It also plays for me into the concept of limitation breeds creativity. And I think that's what, like, some of these games that we have a lot of nostalgia for, a lot of I think the nostalgia and where we identify their design as being so good is because they're able to do, again, more with less, and they find really creative solutions to make things feel more open and dynamic than they are. Like I was talking about Pirates, right? It's like, the ports are all set up in the exact same way, but with the same NPCs, with literally a carbon copy, but because they can, like, each one has its own role, and then within that role there's like a couple of different subtypes of things that they can offer you. It just like it branches out very, very quickly with a small amount of initial content. Whereas it's like if you're going for, okay, we want to have all these like super duper detailed things, well, then you have to spend so much time making that okay, now you have like a very like a facade of a world that's very propped up. Right.
Which is something that I have to give the development behind Breath of the Wild credit for, is that for as massive as the world is, it's completely unique. I mean, you have sort of your archetypical, here's the, Death Mountain volcano place, here's the desert, here's the water place, and things like that. And so, of course, those are all going to be unique. But even just the terrain and the areas in general, it all is handcrafted. You can tell that there were designers who were going in and creating their own little section of the world and placing everything and making it look natural and like it fit in. Is there going to necessarily be something on every cliff? No, you might find some animals or whatnot, but it's there, and the world is created, in a way that it feels like you're really in a world. Because I've been playing it so much, I've started to notice certain assets that are reused. Like, I had to climb up a bunch of these spires. I didn't have to. I was climbing up a bunch of spires looking for Koroks.
You had to, and it was necessary.
Yes, the completionist in me required it. But as I was climbing up them, I noticed that a number of them basically were maybe not exact copies, but it looked like it was the same asset that was used in a couple different places in terms of like, here's this spire, you climb up it, and the top kind of arches in the same way and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And cool. If you're going to climb every single spire, you'll notice that. If you're looking around, you're like, wow, those are a lot of awesome spires. You're not going to notice that in terms of, the larger sense of things. But I think that if it's done in a way that works and fits, then it can get away with it. Like we've talked about Mass Effect 1 getting away with having the, basically exact same scenario for every planetary landing, where it's like, go in the base layout is identical, except there are boxes in different places.
But there are like 3 or 4 different variations. Yeah.
Yeah.
But those variations sometimes do just enough.
Yep. So it's kind of working with what they had in terms of being able to add a lot of breadth of content, sacrificing a little bit of the unique depth
as
it all.
James Brown would have said, you've got to use what you got to get just what you want.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Just splendid.
Yeah, I don't know though. I'm not so against the whole remake and remaster thing. Although I think I'm actually more in favor of the remaster than the true remake. Definitely as evidenced by the upcoming release of Starcraft remastered, which I'm pretty excited about.
That'll be cool. I never played the original Starcraft, but I'm excited to pick it up and see what it's like.
Well, let me explain a little bit about what Blizzard is doing, because it's kind of cool. So they're making a few updates to the original game, which is Starcraft Brood War. Well, that's the expansion, the original game, but it's kind of like the canon copy of or canon version at this point for the multiplayer scene and the esports scene, etc. And just kind of the version of the game that has stood the test of time, because it's 20 years old at this point. Anyway, so they're updating the game to work with modern operating systems. I think they're doing something to fix the multiplayer, and they're making it free.
Oh, free.
Yes.
Can always get on board with free.
And then I don't remember exactly when, but then they're releasing an HD remaster for $40.
Nice.
So to me, this is perfect. 100% the perfect ideal scenario for what I would want a company to do to a remaster of an old game. Yeah. It's they update the game. They're like, okay, we know everyone loves this. All the people who loved this and played it, we know all of them have bought it at one point, right? I've bought the game before. I know all the people I know who played the game have bought the game at least once. So but I can't play it right now, for example. And that situation applies to a lot of people. Yeah. So it's really cool of them to release it for free, acknowledging that fact, not be okay, here, let's just rake in some more cash and then rake in some more cash. And then we know these people, love our games and have played our games for 20 years, but let's just take some more of their money to give them the same games that they've already played. Right. But no, they're saying we're going to allow the community to play this and love this game because they do, and we're going to make sure it's going to be around for a long time. And then we're also going to put some extra love into it. And yes, we should get paid for that. And I totally agree. I totally agree with them.
And I think that it in a similar fashion in terms of these HD remakes, the Wind Waker you're playing right now on the Wii U is not only HD and looks great compared to the GameCube version, but they went in and updated and added a lot of things that make a lot of the nuisances of the GameCube version go away. For example, I don't know if you are to this point, but there's a quick sail option in the Wii U version where you push the button and the wind goes behind your sail and you sail faster. Mm-hmm. In the GameCube version, you had to stop, take out your conductor's wand, play the wind song, change the direction of the wind to go the direction you needed it to go, and then you could sail. And so it was just this very repetitive process of stop, do the thing, make the thing, and go. And they were like, okay, this isn't integral to the gameplay. Let's get rid of that.
Yeah.
Make it more streamlined and easy. And doing just like all of those quality of life fixes that back then weren't possible because there were no updates.
Yeah.
They couldn't be like, oh, let's release a patch for Wind Waker right now and just ship everyone a new GameCube disc.
Yeah, I don't think I have that conducting pattern yet, but that's an interesting mechanic. And I feel like it would work better if it was more situational as to when you needed to use it.
Yeah.
Like if it wasn't just like, okay, the wind's blowing in the wrong direction, so you literally can't go where you need to go.
Yeah.
Actually, that was the cool part about Sid Meier's Pirates, is they had a reasonably realistic based, I mean, it wasn't like physics realism, but just in terms of the way the directions worked, realistic based like sail type to wind simulation. So just like you actually didn't want to have the wind directly behind you, because a lot of the ships during that era, you didn't. Like the wind needed to be blowing at an angle or from the side to get the maximum speed. So they had like a differential speed rating for every direction of the wind for a ship, which is pretty cool.
That's cool.
But it wasn't necessarily just like the wind is directly behind you. So you could use different techniques that are like sometimes like more complicated versions of these are used in actual sailing, where it's like you can like bank one way and then turn and kind of like weave back and forth by using the kind of the wind perpendicular to yourself. So like if Wind Waker had that, then you could make it so that, changing the direction of the wind is a bit more situational, and maybe you need to use it to solve a puzzle or like do something cool.
I mean, there definitely is. Wait, if you're in
what?
Oh, you're on Dragon Roost Island. Never mind. I think I'm getting a little ahead of myself. But yeah, there is, to get into that place, didn't you have to use wind like in your favor? There was like a gusty area.
Oh, is that like the first thing you learn?
Well, because you have to like throw the wing person up onto a ledge or something. On Dragon Roost?
No, I think you had to unblock like a spigot of water and it like filled up.
Oh, okay. Well, anyway, there are some wind-based mechanics in the game where you do need to solve puzzles.
No, you're totally right. I'm just crazy. I totally remember that.
But yeah, I think that doing remakes and remasters are a really neat way to revitalize an older game that was a good concept in terms of, I think that there can be a line of like beneficial business wise or marketing wise, like this game sold great, we know it's going to sell great, let's remake it. That is appealing, so the companies are going to be like, yes, do it, make us more money. But at the same time, the only downside to that is then we don't make any progress. We don't make any newer things,
Right.
And so if it's just remakes and remakes and remakes because the golden age of gaming is slowly behind us, then we're never going to, get anywhere newer in the larger AAA scene. Whereas, like doing the Starcraft thing, I think that updating it and whatnot and having it be available for free is genius, because people are going to be like, wait, I want this to look better, and then like support it if they enjoy the game with the like full, HD thingamabobber.
Yeah, it's definitely exciting. I think you're right in that to some extent it does kind of feel like the golden age of gaming is behind us, but I think it's like a false sense also. It's like true and not true at the same time,
Right.
It's like because they had to do less with more, there were certain things that happened, or like certain mechanics that got put into place that just were different, and we're not going to see that again now. But there, like, the progress that'll be made in the future will just be in a different direction, and we don't know what it's going to be. So,
right.
I think there will be a second wind. I think there will be a point where maybe we reach like a graphical peak or a more of a plateau. Because it always seems like we're at a plateau and then we're not, right?
I think that there's definitely peaks and valleys. And we might be sort of leveling off before another peak, or maybe we're in a valley and we just have to level out and then start going back up again. But it's with anything, there's going to be phases where it's just like, hey, let's just make more money, make a remake.
Honestly,
and then that money could maybe, allow them to do something newer down the road or something. Who knows?
what I'm kind of surprised hasn't happened is, and maybe we're just waiting for the right game engine to come along, but I feel like to some extent, there's got to be a game engine that would make it plateau. Like, okay, you can make stuff that looks good enough in this engine and it's accessible enough that now, like, kind of the gloves are off in terms of it opens the doors for lots of different types of designs because the barrier to entry is now a lot lower.
Yeah.
Maybe that's going to be like the new whatever source that Valve maybe is working on.
But what about when they, have to update it and remaster the game for 16K resolution?
Oh, yes.
Or, 256-bit processing.
Why?
Because bigger numbers are better, obviously.
Yeah. Let's make a monitor that goes up to 11.
I mean, why not? Can it shoot Bowsers?
Can it shoot 10 Bowsers? That also shoot 10 Bowsers.
Exactly.
I think I want to do an HD remaster of the 10 Bowser shooting game.
I think that it's an interesting line to tread in terms of making remakes and, creating new original game. I don't know how to feel about some of it, because I love the fact that I'm able to play games that I have a lot of nostalgia value for in a newer way. And I also love the fact that people who weren't able to play it in its original iteration are able to get the experience of it, because I think that a lot of these games are very integral to the path that gaming has made.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, new games should also be taking the place so that these people who are coming into gaming, like we were back with all of our nostalgia, have their own nostalgia games to look back upon, Like, maybe people will look back on Battlefront 2 and be like, man, that was really great. I wonder when they're going to do the EXHD remaster of Battlefront 2. Like, that's something that's important, is they need to keep making new games so that, there's more nostalgia to
have for future generations. Yeah.
Forward. Basically, video games are just a nostalgia machine that needs to be perpetuated and needs to also generate new iterations of nostalgia for future generations.
But I think for that to happen to some extent, like, you have to have stuff that, like, pushes some of the boundaries. Like, let's see a game that takes the concepts that Battlefront 2 was, like, playing with when it came to galactic conquest and space battles and stuff, and push those concepts. I think that's really why to me it seems like the game industry has stagnated to a certain extent, is because I feel like concepts like that aren't being pushed. It very much is more the focus on, and that's why I say it's the focus on the graphics more than anything. And maybe that's not entirely fair, but, like, there's a regression for those concepts. For those, like, I guess open world games have kind of taken them, but it's become, maybe it's the fact that it's like a genre now. So it's like you take that concept and it's like, okay, this concept is its own genre, and now we know how to take this concept and package it into a game, and that game is an open world game, right? If you want to have something that is like a Galactic Conquest, okay, well, that means you want to go to a bunch of different places, which means you want an open world game, so we're going to make an open world game, right?
But as much of a fan of open world, gaming as I am, it's not something for everyone.
Right.
Not everyone is going to want to, have all of that freedom. People are going to want to have direction and a story to follow. And so I think that having that be the end decision, or like the end assumption to come to, is maybe not dangerous, but, like, why? Why is that where it needs to end up?
Well, I think it comes from, like, a laser focus on, like, a genre or a particular, like, end product, right? It's like, we need to make a game that does this.
We need to make it shoot Bowsers.
Right. We're going to make a new Star Wars Battlefront game. And, they said that, like, I was reading a quote from the developers, and they were saying it needed to be what Battlefront should be. That's what they were going to make.
For Battlefront 2?
Yeah. No, the first one, the one that just came out. The first new one. Sorry, it's super confusing.
Yeah.
But they said that they were going to make the game that Battlefront should be, implying that like what they did, it's almost a conceitedness to it, and part of that maybe just marketing.
Yeah.
But it's the idea that's like they have a vision for what it should be, and that's, I don't know, I kind of just dislike that way of approaching it. I think it's like you want to take the concept and explore like what the concept has to offer.
Yeah, it's I'm sure a marketing thing more than anything else. But
I'm getting too hung up on it. As I want to do.
I get what you mean though about it for sure. It's not the best sounding thing, and they didn't for whatever reason. But yeah, I don't want to see. Well, and now here's the problem with nostalgia junkies. I want to say, I don't want to see Battlefront 2 just copy paste Galactic Conquest and space battles. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I would rather them copy paste it than not have it.
Right.
If they're not going to push the boundaries and try something new or have their own attempt at these concepts in Battlefront 2, then at least give me what existed back then, I guess.
Yeah, I think what we'd really want is their take on Galactic Conquest.
Right, but that's what's difficult is because if they do their take and it doesn't sell, that's risky. Like if everyone hates it and they like the old thing better because nostalgia, or for whatever reason, maybe the old thing is awful and the new one's way better, but people don't like it because it's different, and so it doesn't have good initial sales.
Yeah, I mean, because really that comment of what it is, what it should be, it's what we think it should be. And so if this is what they think it should be, I'm like, well, then clearly we envision two very different games. And the things that we valued about the original were very different. And I think that's what, I guess, maybe makes us just different, not in that the audience that they're looking to please, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's very true. They have to appease the audience, but they also have to make the thing that they want to make. And where's the balance there,
And so maybe, I guess now I'm going the other way. It's like I was optimistic 10 minutes ago because I was thinking, okay, there's always going to be more games made. But since the mainstream of gaming has changed so much, I think what we look for in gaming is better served by the indie gaming community, just in terms of the values and the audience that they're looking, or the audience that supports them.
Yeah, and as long as indie gaming is a thing that can exist and support itself, then I think we'll be fine.
But yeah,
it doesn't need to sell big. It doesn't need to be AAA.
Right, but it's kind of depressing for like the state of the progress of game dynamics and mechanics and design features for AAA gaming a little bit. That's where it's depressing.
Yeah, I agree.
But it's it's definitely like a 7 million sides of a two-sided coin, because there's ups and downs to all of this.
And there always will be. There's never going to be a wonderful solution one way or the other. The only thing you can do is talk about it.
Yeah.
I guess. Analyze it or just deal with it. I don't know. There's probably other options in there somewhere.
Hashtag deal with it. Pretty sure that's a hashtag of some form.
Probably. Well, you brought a sample of music last episode.
I sure did.
And I have two, actually, that I want to play. They're both from Mass Effect 1, which
nostalgia
sort of fits
junkie.
Yeah. But I picked them for kind of two different reasons. The first one that I'll play is a segment from the Normandy theme. So when you're just walking around on the Normandy, this is the music that plays. I just gotta pull this up over here real quick.
Real quack. Tickle?
Quack. Quack. Quack tickles. The tickle quacks.
You're tickling my quackers. such an iconic sound. That piece. Oh man, it sounds so ominous and mysterious.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about this, and when I was sort of kind of trying to decide what I wanted to bring and talk about, is the theme on the Normandy. Listening to it just by itself, like you totally described it right. It is just ominous and mysterious. But it kind of brought up a lot of questions for me, in the sense that it works as a piece of music in terms of kind of foreshadowing the story of Mass Effect 1. But it almost felt a little out of place when I was listening to it out of context and then trying to place it to me walking around on the Normandy and whatnot.
It's like it almost doesn't fit. Like it doesn't fit with that mental image.
To thinking about being on a ship and the fanciest ship essentially that you could ever want to be on, and flying around trying to do good for your galactic space cop self, basically, at least in the early part of the game, it doesn't fit what I would feel like walking around on that ship would be like. Now, the interesting thing is that it never stuck out to me as wrong when I was playing the game. And I don't necessarily think that it's fair to say that it's wrong now in listening to it, but it definitely strikes a lot of different tones. And maybe it's just because listening to it in reflection, it has that, foreboding, mysterious and ominous space sound with all of the arpeggiated bass going on. And I don't know. I
was just gonna say, I feel like that ties into the aesthetic of the plot of the game as well.
Right,
it
definitely.
It sets
it
up
definitely
the whole theme and ambiance of the entire game. Because when you're flying around in the Normandy, it's not just that you're flying around in the Normandy and you're an awesome space cop. Is that there's some bad shit going down, and you're trying to figure out what it is, but it's but those things are the mysteries of the universe, right? That's where that ominousness really then ties itself into the rest of the game. Ominousness. The ominous stuff and everything that you're experiencing and discovering takes place because of the Normandy, because you're on the ship traveling there. And so it acts as kind of the gateway to all of these mysteries that you're trying to solve. Yeah. That's a really good way of putting it. I like that. It made me think of like the Nautilus, the 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea,
right,
kind of thing. It's like you're on the cutting edge of human knowledge and understanding and that exploration. Very Star Trek too.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and that was again kind of just coming to terms with it, or thinking about the music in a broader sense, as opposed to like I said when I first heard it, I was like, that sounds weird. I was walking around on the Normandy talking to people listening to this, but in the broader cohesion of the Mass Effect 1 soundtrack, it fits in really well, and it fits in and has that that sense of, hey, bad stuff is going to happen and you're gonna learn about it, but it doesn't necessarily I don't know, it doesn't necessarily fit when it happens, but I guess that it's just this underlying theme, because it is the underlying theme of the ship, the Normandy, that you hear it continually throughout the game, and so it just kind of reinforces this idea of mystery and whatnot, as opposed to it necessarily needing to be, this is the theme that would make sense for being on board a spaceship.
I think the part of the game where this theme sticks out in my brain the most is actually during some of the opening scenes, where where Joker's taking you through the mass relay, etc., and he's like, oh, threw myself across the galaxy and drift only 1,500K, whatever. And because he's complaining about the Turian, I forget his name, who is bitching him. But I remember it underneath that part, and actually it does strike me as odd too, but it totally fit at that time, because it was it fit with the sci-fi mystery feel for sure.
And maybe that's just what it is. It's Mass Effect 1 as well, exposing you to this universe and exposing you to all of this unknown, technology, the mass relays and all of these new alien races and whatnot.
Yeah, it's like as a player, you just saw the ship go through this like massive laser beam, and you're like, "What the hell just happened?" Like this is some mysterious, like crazy whack universe.
Yeah. So I guess in terms of experiencing the game, it fits and it makes sense.
Yeah.
And trying to, it's interesting though, because trying to listen to it separately and hearing just the music without seeing it immediately with the visual, but then because we've played the game, trying to place the music to the visual is weird because the focus is now on the music and not
it's inverted,
the experience, which is what's important. The experience is what's important, not the music by itself or the visual by itself, but how those two things together and the story as well impact the player experience, which I guess, we've confirmed is good because we both thought that it fit and it wasn't weird to us when we were playing the game. So it's just pulling those apart maybe sometimes doesn't, I guess, carry the same impact.
Yeah.
Which is why it's important to
like if you hadn't told me that it was the Normandy theme, I may not have been able to place that that's the part of the game it was from. I definitely would have been able to identify if this was a mystery sound segment, right? I would have been able to identify that it's Mass Effect, and I probably would have guessed Mass Effect 1, I feel like, but I don't think I would have placed it on the Normandy, which is interesting too, like taking it out of context.
Right.
Context is very important.
Yeah, it is. And I don't know. I think that it definitely lends itself to the overall theme, like we said, and that's what's really important. But kind of going off of that sense of theme, as well as just the music of Mass Effect, I wanted to play the piece from the game, from Mass Effect 1 again as well, Uncharted Worlds, which is the music that you hear when you're exploring, well, not exploring, when you bring up the like galaxy map and you're looking at it and picking where you want to fly to and whatnot. So I'll go ahead and play that.
Man, can I just say how much I freaking love the music from this game?
Yes. I distinctly remember buying like the CD, the physical CD of the Mass Effect 1 soundtrack just because it was fantastic. But I really just, before we get into talking about this piece, want to point out how incredible it is at building in these layers.
Yeah.
And just kind of like, so you open the galaxy map and it's like, okay, look, this is, the galaxy. And you're like, wow, there's a lot. And it starts out really kind of simple and open. And then it incorporates all of these new instruments. And then the tone changes when like I pretty sure it was a flute at the end sort of there, kind of like comes in over the top of it all. And it adds really that last impacting, like, you're in space. You're in space. Like, just kind of like,
in case you forgot, you're still in space.
But I have a hard time kind of breaking this piece down and describing exactly, or like analyzing exactly what it is about it that makes it fit so perfectly to, exploring uncharted territory, exploring space. And it's funny too, because in Mass Effect 1, the interaction you have in the galaxy map is very static. It's very much clicking on a thing and then reading a lot of text.
Yeah.
It's, in the later Mass Effect games, there's a lot more you do flying around, blah, blah, blah. But it's just interesting that this music, I think, really makes that static experience feel less static in terms of, you're reading text about these planets, or you're, moving a cursor around and clicking on planets, which kind of sounds boring, but the music, I think, in this circumstance is really what makes that experience feel larger than it might be otherwise. Like if that music wasn't there and it was still just the Normandy theme, like I don't know that it would be as interesting to open the galaxy map every single time that you plot a new course.
Yeah, and maybe it isn't interesting to some people.
I mean, maybe, but
yeah, definitely. It also, one thing I noticed too is that it fits very nicely in with the Normandy theme in the sense that it still carries those kind of almost dark and brooding elements with it, despite being a little bit more bright in its overall tone compared to the Normandy theme.
Yeah. And I think that it is fitting. I guess if we're looking at having the Normandy theme be this recurring sense of ominous mystery, the Uncharted Worlds piece of music is the kind of the brighter light in the sense that we're going here to make a difference.
Let's go break through the cloud of mystery and reveal what's happening because we're going somewhere.
Yeah. And there's still mystery and there's still this uncertainty that's going to exist when we get there, but we know why we're doing this and we're doing it for the good. So let's do the good.
Yeah. That's cool. Yeah, it's really cool and interesting hearing them side by side like that too.
Yeah, I do. Thinking back on Mass Effect 1, definitely the Uncharted Worlds piece sticks out a lot for me. I remember that, and it's definitely one of my favorites. The Normandy theme, on the other hand, less so. Not that it's not a good piece of music, but just in terms of it's not something that I've remembered. And I think that it could be when you're on the Normandy itself, there's a lot more going on. You're walking around talking to people and doing other things on the ship that is much more active. When you're in the galaxy map looking at everything, like I was saying, there's not a lot going on. So you pay a lot more attention to the music. And so I think in that regard, it's important for it to be brighter and more auditorily stimulating, I guess, to use words. Because like the Normandy theme, it can kind of just be there in the background and remind you of the mystery. And then the Uncharted Worlds theme kind of even like builds on that and adds this, larger than life sense of the galaxy that you're going to be exploring. And I think that the music is more memorable for me because there was less that I was doing in the game at the time. So it's important that the piece of music for the galaxy map, is going to be more melodic and whatnot to keep the player's attention.
I think it's also more memorable because you press a button and hear the music, and then you press a button and you hear the music, basically about opening the galaxy map. So I think it's like it's very tied in with the experience of opening the galaxy map, looking around and looking at the galaxy.
Yeah, you make the music happen. If you never open the galaxy map, you'll never hear it.
Right. Yeah, but just the fact that it's tied to an action as opposed to just a state of being walking around, right? I feel like it makes it stick out more in our memories, at least.
Yeah, definitely.
Or like at least you notice it, because like I definitely remember playing the game and just walking around, opening the galaxy map and then noticing the music, whereas before maybe I didn't fully like consciously realize that there was music, even though I was hearing it.
Right.
It's kind of interesting how that happens. But like even when you're not consciously totally aware that there's music there, I mean you are, but like at the forefront of your mind at least, it's still affecting the mood.
Yeah, and I think like you were saying, which is very accurate, you're pressing a button and receiving feedback of music. So it is much more that you're going to notice that change because you have to actively put in something to get the, reward of music in this case. But
I mean, I would totally be able to be Pavlov trained for music because I love it so much. Like press button, receive meme music.
Meme music? I don't
music
know
made
that
of
we need
memes.
any more Rick Astley, Rick rolling happening.
Never gonna give you up.
So anyway, this has been Tone into Gaming. Before we get too far down the memeage hole, we've done all right this episode, I feel like. In terms of less
the memeage hole.
Yeah.
I want to make weird. Like a Pavlov never gonna give you up joke, but it's not coalescing. I'm very sad.
I'm a sad duck. I'm going to somehow make it so when you hear a bell ring, immediately
you start singing.
Yeah. I don't know how, but we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out somehow.
I'm never going to give up on you trying to figure that out.
I don't know that I would put all your eggs in that basket, honestly, but you do what you want to do. That's fine. That's fine. But what we want you to do, I'm pointing at the computer because I'm pointing at the audience. You can't see me, but I'm doing it. If you want,
we want you
to give us your comments and or suggestions and or tell us about video game music you like or what makes things nostalgic or memorable.
Or your thoughts on remakes and remasters and the upcoming Battlefront game.
Definitely. You can contact us on Twitter at tuneintogaming or shoot us an email, tuneintogaming@gmail.com. And we'll
certainly can.
We'll read those because we haven't gotten any yet.
Well, I would love to read some, so please send me some.
Do it. Yeah.
Do it.
But I don't know if you have any closing thoughts, Sir Quack.
My only closing thoughts are to close.
All right.
Tune out.